Hey folks, Gway. So a fella down in Texas gave a talk the other day at Steadfast Church. This fella was that asshat I mentioned in a video a while back. I think I've mentioned him a few times. But anyway, in this particular video, he said a few things, and two of which I'm going to do videos about today. The first is he claimed that America, the United States of America, is a nation that was founded to be a Christian nation. That the founding fathers had every intention that this would be a Christian nation, that America would be a Christian nation, that the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the First Amendment were all written with an understanding that the Bible was the guiding principle, that God was the source of the inspiration, that Jesus, that Christianity was the way of things, and that Christianity, Christ, and God, and the Bible were never mentioned in those particular documents simply because it was a given. Those were the givens of the day. This is who we are, this is who we will be into perpetuity. Now, this guy actually goes so far as to say that the First Amendment, where it says, people have the freedom of religion, it didn't mean that you and I could choose to be Christian or atheist or Hindu or Muslim or any other religion, but rather it meant you had the right to choose which Christian denomination you would be a part of. You could pick whichever flavor of Christianity most tickled your fancy, but you were going to be a Christian. Let's just for the sake of argument, let's say he was right. Let's say 200 and some odd years ago, a bunch of guys get into a room and said, we're going to create a Christian nation. And then they sat down and they wrote what could arguably be some of the most beautiful words ever written, most eloquent words ever written. Let's just give him that. The United States was meant to be, and always meant to be, a Christian nation. So what? What does it matter? What does it matter what people hundreds of years ago wanted? Things change. Societies change. Cultures change. Values and ideals change. I mean, those guys held some very, very strange values and some very, very awful ideals. Things that we've long since let go of. Ways that we've long since rejected. Why was it okay for us to reject those things but not all things? Why is it okay for us to say we're going to give up on those particular values and ideals but not this one? Things change. The world changes. And for what it's worth, the Constitution, and I'm no scholar, but the Constitution, just by the very presence of the amendments, was written with the understanding that the document needed to breathe, that the nation needed to be able to change and to adjust and to flex if it was going to survive, that the great American experiment needed to be allowed to be an experiment, something that would shift over time. The very fact that you can repeal amendments tells us that nothing was to be carved in stone, that everything was meant to be adjustable, tweaked, forgotten about, ignored. That no part of it was actually meant to be so sacred, so holy, so revered, that it couldn't become what was needed by future generations. It bothers me. It bothers me that Christians hold to the past the way they do. I mean, I've said it countless times that good theology requires us to look at things like church history, the tradition of our denominations, the tradition of our religion. For us to come to a good and healthy understanding of God, we must be able to look into the past. But our past is not an anchor. Our past is not an anchor that keeps us in place. Christ is our anchor. But our past is simply a collection of our experiences that we can look back on and learn from. In some cases say, hey, maybe we should try this again. In other cases say, ooh, we are never going back there. But it should never be something that we rely upon for our direction into the future. Again, a resource? Yes. The map? Absolutely not. The policy? No way. The ideology? Never. We look at the past, but we let it be the past. I mean, again, as Christians, we worship a guy who came into the world, who was born into a culture that had a beautiful, vibrant, ancient understanding of God. And yet he comes along and says, I've got a new way for you to see this. I've got a new way for you to perceive God. I've got a new way for you to come in contact with God. I've got a new way for you to come in contact with God directly, without anybody else, without any trappings, without any special magical words, without needing a full moon or a high tide. There's just you and God in this way. If you walk my way, if you live my way. Jesus, I would argue, didn't come to give us something else to bolt ourselves to, something else to chain ourselves to, something else to be bound by, but rather he gave us a methodology that allows us to grow, that calls us to grow, that demands we grow, that demands that our understanding continuously shift and expand and sometimes retract. But that our understanding of God would always be something that is in flux. Something that we can't ever really truly grasp and hold on to, but something that requires us to continuously be thinking about, be seeking, be asking, be knocking, wanting more of. The Christians out there that are looking back into history and saying, yeah, America was always supposed to be a Christian nation, let it go. Hold on to Christ. It's a wild ride. It's a crazy, wild ride. It's an adventure. And we don't necessarily know exactly where it's going to take us, but it is going to take us into the future. Christ calls us not to live for the past, but to live for the future. And Christ calls us not to live for nation, but for neighbor. Christ calls us to live for Him, to live His way. Personally, I don't believe the United States was created to be a Christian nation. Not everybody who sat in that room, who wrote those eloquent words, were Christians. And I can't imagine somebody who was as opinionated and strong-willed as Thomas Jefferson standing up and saying, yeah, I'm a deist, but Christianity is the way to go. I don't buy that. And I especially don't buy that these architects of these documents, when writing the First Amendment, didn't understand the difference between the word religion and denomination. That they would use the word religion when they meant denomination. That they would use the word religion when they meant that you could choose any branch of Christianity. I also don't believe that these people, these architects, these people who wrote these documents had any intention that their ways would be the ways of the people, of the culture, of the society hundreds of years later. These people whose ideals and values are greatly different than our own today, whose theological understandings are greatly different than our own today, who could never, in a century of dreaming, imagine the world being what it is today. I can't imagine that they ever wrote something with the purpose of binding countless generations to principles that they believe to be perfect. No, those guys wrote a document that would serve future generations, not enslave them. As Christ offers us a new teaching, a new, powerful, authoritative teaching meant to serve us, meant to draw us closer to God, meant to help us live this life in greater freedom, not to bind us, not to enslave us. May the Lord bless you, may the Lord keep you, may the Lord's face be made to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord's countenance be lifted up to you, may you always know the peace of being in the Lord's presence. I pray that we will all embrace the way of Jesus Christ. Let go of earthly attachments, earthly ideology, earthly desires, earthly understandings, and follow Him on this great adventure of greater discovery and understanding. Amen. Nemultus.